Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about how to keep up with Powercreep. So, this article slash video should have been possibly published maybe a month or two ago. It was in my draft folder. I got sidetracked and then forgot about it somehow, but nevertheless, I have posted it. So some of the stuff written here may or may not be a little dated in the sense that 3-player co-op had not come out yet. So just keep that in the back of your head. But regardless, I want to basically talk about what power creep is, when it occurs, why it's actually healthy for a game, as well as what the term meta means. Basically, we hear this term all the time, saying this is the top tier or top meta team, this is in the meta, and I want to basically just elaborate and explain as to what those mean, because these are somewhat common terms that I use on my website even, and I want to make sure people actually understand what I'm saying when I write these. So, I know it can somewhat be overwhelming to at least try and keep up with what is current or in or meta in this game, especially if you're more IAP light or very new to the game, because there's a lot of catch up, because there's about 5 years worth of content almost. So there is a lot of gameplay and a lot of things available to you, and I kind of want to provide a little bit of advice and guidance as to what you can do to try and catch up as best as possible, and to really not worry or stress out about this too much overall. So, what is power creep? So, power creep can best be defined as a progressively advancing rate of mechanics in terms of, like, from your monster collection, in terms of what your cards can actually do, as well as the dungeon difficulty, the spawns that you encounter, the mechanics and hurdles you have to overcome. So, it is very important and very healthy for any long-standing game to have a certain degree or level of power creep involved, because if there wasn't any progression or advancement, the game would get stale. For example, if we never got any new cards, we'd kind of run out of things to actually acquire or hunt for, and conversely, if we didn't have any challenging dungeons to play through, what would we be using all these new flashy and shiny cards for, aside from looking at them and admiring how pretty they are? So, every game needs to have power creep, but the main thing you have to keep in mind is power creep has to be kept in check. We need to have a balance in terms of the progression rates of the two domains, so to speak, of power creep, because in terms of creature power creep or monster power creep, you need to have a certain rate of that increasing. Ideally, that's kept pace by the dungeon difficulty. So they're going up kind of around the same rate, or a bit one, a bit the other. Otherwise, the game kind of gets a little stale because things are either too hard or too easy. So if we want to compare power creep to other games that are currently available, I want to at least pay homage to Hearthstone, because I know Hearthstone a little bit. I used to play it a bit here and there, and basically Hearthstone is a PvP collecting card game, and they do have power creep, but it works very differently than pad. And I don't like this form of power creep as much, because in Hearthstone, the way power creep works is every 2 years they actually cycle out cards that you can be used in competitive play, and that means cards that are over 2 years old become obsolete and redundant. So you have to obviously reacquire new cards and keep constantly acquiring new things to keep abreast of them. By comparison, Puzzle and Dragons has a much better system in place, because older creatures or older monsters basically get recycled back into relevancy, because, for instance, Haku and Kushinada Hime, they are both 3-4 years old maybe, and now they're top tier once again. So pad at least recycles your cards back into relevancy, and I think that's a great system, because that way it also lowers the dependency on IAPing or constantly rolling for new toys, because older things do get at least buffed back to some sort of potency, and this is actually a very healthy aspect for pad overall. Now, there are obviously going to be new cards released, such as like Fujin and also future Nei, as well as other Godfest exclusives, but at least the main idea is you still can somewhat get by with older cards. Like for myself right now, I have 3 Hakus and a Kushinada Hime, so I'm actually able to do very well because I managed to acquire the older cards over time, just because I've had more opportunities to roll them. So now, what does meta mean? So at least for myself, I define meta as most efficient team available, or essentially the most efficient method for clearing content that we currently have. So when I say something is meta, it means they're either like the strongest cards in the game, or they're just very efficient in terms of clearing that certain task or content. So when I say that, like, say, Kusanagi Hime's meta, it means that she's very fast, very efficient, very stable. She's great at doing what she does. You can obviously get by with older cards that were, say, meta 6 months ago. It's just they're going to have a little harder time in newer content. But they can still clear the same amount of things that they could in the past. So, for example, your Krishna, who was able to clear Arena 3 in 2016, can still clear Arena 3 in 2017. The dungeon has not got really much hasn't got harder. You actually have newer toys to play around with. It's just not going to be as efficient as running something like Kusanagi Hime or Dark Athena. So like I already mentioned, like there are two different aspects of Powercreep and Pad, the monsters you have available and the dungeons we get to play through. And at least in North America, Arena 3 was released in August of 2016, and we are in June of 2017. And when I was writing this article, 3-player co-op was not introduced, but let's go back, say, a month in the past, or even just a week or two in the past before 3-player came out. We didn't really have any new content to play through. We would still be playing through Arena 3 over and over again. So it does get a little repetitive and tiresome because we have all these new and exciting cards, but we don't have necessarily something challenging to play through them. So I feel like Gung Ho, at least prior to 3-player co-op, kind of stopped producing a lot of relevant content to play through, and it was just a matter of you constantly grinding back through Arena 3 to acquire the drops, and almost in a way to let other players catch up, so to speak, with what's current in the game. So we kind of have, to a certain extent, cards that are overly powerful, and Arena 3 has become significantly easier at this point in time to actually clear because we now have leaders that are significantly more powerful, tankier, harder hitting, more stable and consistent, that teams like, say, Miru, when they were first released, had some difficulty in clearing. This is not to say Miru cannot clear and farm Arena 3, it's just not as efficient as it used to be because we have better options available at this point in time. So we do have 3-player co-op dungeons, and technically Coliseum does count, but Coliseum doesn't have much incentive to play outside of your first time clear because outside of, say, your first Orpharian and the novelty, it's not really worth pursuing necessarily. Arena 3 is just so much more lucrative overall. Now, I'm well aware that the 3-player co-op dungeons do exist, and to be fair, the arena in 3-player is basically Arena 2, so the drops are the same, just a slightly different spawn at the end. And the Cosmic Trinity dungeons, they're just a little too hard for the average player for the most part. So I guess there is a form of power creep, but the Cosmic Trinity dungeons are very limiting in what you can actually bring to be effective. So generally speaking, we are kind of experiencing a period of catch-up because we haven't really had much new content released necessarily to play through that at least has motivation to actually acquire the drops. Because again, Arena 3 is still, to a certain extent, the best thing to actually play through. Now, what I also feel has kind of been helped facilitating this period of catch-up was the challenge mode reset. So basically a lot of free magic stones. We've had 0 stamina normals. We've had 5 coin dungeon costs, as well as hundreds of thousands of free monster points. So we've been kind of having a period of where everyone can kind of catch up to the meta in the sense that we now have significantly more resources at our disposal to play catch up. So for those who have, like, say, started their accounts a little newer, or they haven't been playing as diligently or not as gung-ho as other players, you've had plenty of time now the last couple months to really just take a breather and prepare yourself overall. Like, to a certain extent, you can kind of think that you've prepared yourself for 3-player co-op that has just came out. Now, I want to kind of just go back to what Arena 3 and why it's so valuable, because Arena 3 rewards the killer latents, which make it quite a bit easier to actually play Arena 3, as well as making, say, SDR farming more efficient. Like, the killer latents are so powerful, and some people think it's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation. We need the killer latents to beat the Arena 3, but we need to beat Arena 3 to get the killers. However, that's not the case. I was able to beat Arena 3 when it first came out without killers, without a lot of the newer, flashier teams. So it is doable. You just need to get over that first initial hurdle. And once you start getting those first couple of clears in, it becomes significantly easier because you are more comfortable with the spawns. You may have your own killers at your disposal, so everything just becomes easier moving forward. In addition, I also feel that a lot of the events thus far have been very lucrative. We've been given lots of different forms of plus eggs through the Gung-Ho Palag machine. We've got so many Tamadras. I have like 200 plus on Fantastic. We have magic stones, and we have lots of rank experience. So we have very well developed accounts, and we're just kind of almost waiting to a certain extent to have exciting and meaningful content to play through. Furthermore, the Player's Choice Godfest that we did have a couple months ago, I believe, was one of the better done ones, because the roster was actually quite powerful for the most part, because it did feature a lot of the powerful cards, and it did feature a lot of Pantheon cards, so you could actually roll and acquire desirable monsters overall to help round out those teams. So right now, I do feel like Kusanagi Hime, Anubis, Dark Metatron, and Dark Athena are going to reign supreme to a certain extent for quite some time. While Dark Athena may have a bit of difficulty in the Cosmic Trinity dungeons, the other three are going to excel quite efficiently, and I don't really foresee them losing much ground outside of maybe a couple 6-stars being released, but it doesn't really shake it up too much for the most part. So, what if I'm not part of the meta? This probably applies to a lot of players in the game out there, and like I mentioned before, it's just meta means you're just the most efficient way of farming or clearing that content. You don't need to be meta to play and enjoy this game. It just makes it so your life is easier. Like I said again before, I want to stress that Krishna can clear Arena 3 with quite strong consistency. It's even easier now with the access to Fujin, but it's just not as efficient as something like Kusanagi Hime. It's going to take a bit more time, a little bit more effort, but it will still get the job done. So just because you don't have those meta teams, and you still have a great chance and opportunity to clear content, because again, so many different teams and compositions are able to clear and possibly even farm Arena 3. So this just means you have to go either slower or make a little bit more accommodations or play a little different, but that's not to say you can't actually accomplish things in pad. Furthermore, this game is not a PvP-oriented game, so your own personal progression doesn't really impact your overall playing and happiness experience. So, fighting off boredom. Now, Puzzle & Dragons is one of the oldest mobile games in existence, and depending on how long you've played for, boredom may or may not start sinking in because you've kind of done everything that you think is meaningful and exciting. Now, the obvious simple solution is to have new and meaningful content being released, but let's just say that's not currently available. Like, there's no new content that really is meaningful to you, so you have to try and find ways to keep yourself motivated, or we can even just peer into the future at the Japan server and basically see what's coming to us in the next 3 months or so. Now, like I said, this is a period of catch-up, so again, if you are still excited and you still feel like maybe a little bit of burnout, just at least try and acquire valuable resources. Collect your magic stones, get your Tamadras, get your plus eggs, get your evolution materials, just stock up on everything, and then you'll be ready for when the next wave of power creep is released. Because once, say, the next wave of new and exciting stuff comes out, you are ready for it. You have a giant, ample stock of skill delay resist to slap on your team, you have plus eggs to hypermax everything, you have your inherits correctly thought out, they've done your research. So we do have ways to do at least plan things out. Now, let's just assume that you've done all that. You've prepped yourself, you've got ample supplies stocked up. What you can do now is possibly start clearing out all the harder content you've never necessarily tackled, or the more unusual challenge modes, or you can even just try and have fun. And by fun, I mean using more interesting or niche novelty teams to start playing through content. You can challenge yourself to do things that you normally would not, just because at this point in time, I honestly feel like we have ample or excessive amounts of stamina, because right now, with the way 4x technicals and descends work, we have so much rank experience coming in. For myself, at rank 800 plus on both accounts, I can rank up on a regularly consistent basis when those events are active. So I do, to a certain extent, have ample stamina to play around with. So you can use that stamina to play around and fiddle with teams you may not necessarily think are meta or as popular at this point in time. So you may think it's wasteful, but again, this is a game and you want to have fun. So another thing you can do is set goals for yourself in pad. Like, again, everyone plays this game for different reasons, but the idea is you want to have some goal or motivation for you to try and strive or reach towards to keep you interested in playing. So as a small little note to 3-player co-op, I have wrote about it in the previous articles, but for the most part, a lot of these points kind of apply to a certain extent, because 3-player co-op is fun, but it's not necessarily that meaningful for a lot of players. And by that, I mean the arena in 3-player is interesting because it's obviously a new mechanic of working with 2 other people, but the spawns itself are not different outside of the Metatron replacing Kali. The Metatrons are harder to a certain extent, but also easier in other ways because they can be delayed, you can break their defense, so there are ways to circumnavigate the Metatrons. It's a different hurdle, but it's only 1 floor out of, I think, 22 floors, so it's not that crazy, and it only awards the same things as Arena 2. So Arena 3 is still better. And in terms of the Cosmic Trinity dungeons, they are a little ridiculous in terms of difficulty. I feel that very few players have the chance to clear the highest difficulty one on a consistent or regular basis, so it's going to be tough for the average player to acquire them. And again, if you don't like multiplayer, it's going to be tough for you to really persevere through, because the dungeons are designed for 3-player co-op. Yes, you have the potential to solo them, but you need to get lucky, or certain spawns have to happen. Like, it's just a little bit more of a nightmare. And it's something to keep in mind. Like, you want to try and find friends ideally, or utilize the Discord servers or Facebook groups to try and find more intelligent, so to speak, partners. So in conclusion, like, I do feel like the rate of power creep in pad has been advancing quite quickly from the monsters currently available. The dungeons are at least starting to finally pick up the pace. I possibly might sneeze, maybe not, but they're starting to pick up the pace, because now, at least with 3-player, there is hard things to play. But again, if multiplayer is not your thing, you're going to feel a little left out regardless. So how do you feel about keeping abreast with the current meta or rate of power creep? Do you think it's too fast, too slow in terms of dungeons and monsters available? Let me know what you think about in the comments below. Hopefully you all have a mantastic day, and happy puzzling.